At 07:10 on the morning of October 25, 1944, Commander Ernest Evans stood on the bridge of USS Johnston, watching the silhouettes of 4 Japanese battleships materialize through the pre-dawn haze off Samar Island. The largest warship ever built, Yamato, led the formation, her 18.1-inch guns capable of hurling a shell weighing as much as a small car over 25 miles. Behind her came Nagato, Kongo, and Haruna. 7 cruisers followed. 11 destroyers screened the flanks. Against this armada stood 6 American escort carriers, 3 destroyers, and 4 destroyer escorts. Not a single ship in Taffy 3 carried guns larger than 5 inches. Evans was 41 years old, part Cherokee, Naval Academy graduate, class of 1932. He had told his crew at Johnston's commissioning ceremony exactly 1 year earlier that this would be a fighting ship, that he intended to go into harm's way, and that anyone uncomfortable with that proposition should leave immediately. No one had left. Now, as the Japanese fleet closed at 25 knots toward the virtually defenseless escort carriers behind him, Evans faced a mathematical certainty. Johnston displaced 2,500 tons. The heavy cruiser Kumano, leading the Japanese cruiser column, displaced 13,600 tons. She outweighed Johnston by a factor of 5. Her 8-inch guns could penetrate armor Johnston did not possess. Her torpedoes carried warheads twice the size of Johnston's Mark 15 torpedoes. Evans watched Kumano's turrets train toward the American carriers. The doctrine was clear. Destroyers screened capital ships. They laid smoke. They provided anti-aircraft and anti-submarine protection. They did not charge battleships. Fleet doctrine stated that a destroyer engaging a heavy cruiser would be destroyed within minutes. Fleet doctrine stated that a destroyer engaging a battleship would not survive long enough to close to effective torpedo range. Fleet doctrine stated that the proper response to overwhelming force was organized retreat under covering smoke. Evans ordered Johnston to attack. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The previous 12 months had proven one thing about naval warfare in the Pacific. Material superiority meant everything. The side with more ships, better radar, superior fire control, and reliable weapons won. The side without those advantages lost. By October of 1944, the United States Navy possessed overwhelming material superiority over the Imperial Japanese Navy. American shipyards were producing escort carriers faster than Japan could build destroyers. American radar could detect ships at 20 miles in total darkness. American fire control computers could calculate firing solutions while both ships maneuvered at speed. American torpedoes, after 3 years of catastrophic failures, finally worked. None of that mattered. Off Samar, Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita's center force had slipped through San Bernardino Strait during the night of October 24th, while Admiral William Halsey's Third Fleet, believing Kurita had retreated, steamed north to engage Japanese carriers. This left Taffy 3, Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague's escort carrier group, as the only naval force between Kurita's battleships and the American troops landing on Leyte. The escort carriers displaced 7,000 tons each. They carried 28 aircraft. They were designed to provide air support for amphibious operations, not to fight surface engagements. Their maximum speed was 18 knots. Kurita's cruisers could make 35 knots. The carriers could not outrun the Japanese. The destroyers could not outgun them. The mathematics were simple. Taffy 3 would be annihilated unless something disrupted Kurita's attack. Johnston represented the pinnacle of American destroyer design in 1944. She was a Fletcher-class destroyer, 311 feet 6 inches long, with a beam of 39 feet 8 inches. She displaced 2,500 tons fully loaded. 4 boilers drove 2 steam turbines generating 60,000 shaft horsepower, providing a top speed of 38 knots. She carried 10 21-inch torpedo tubes, 5 5-inch 38 caliber dual-purpose guns, multiple 40mm and 20mm anti-aircraft batteries, depth charge racks, and the most sophisticated radar and fire control systems available in 1944. Her SG surface search radar could detect ships at 20,000 yards. Her Mark 37 fire control director provided accurate gunnery solutions for both surface and air targets. Compared to the destroyers that fought at Guadalcanal 2 years earlier, Johnston was a technological marvel. Compared to Kumano, she was insignificant. Kumano mounted 10 8-inch guns in 5 turrets, each gun capable of firing a 260-pound armor-piercing shell every 40 seconds. Her armor belt measured 5 inches thick, specifically designed to defeat shells from 8-inch guns. Johnston's 5-inch shells would bounce off Kumano's armor at any range beyond 5,000 yards, and even at point-blank range, they lacked the penetrative power to reach vital spaces. Kumano's torpedoes used the Type 93 Long Lance, the most sophisticated torpedo in any navy. They carried a warhead weighing 1,100 pounds, traveled at 48 knots, and had a range of 22 miles. Johnston's Mark 15 torpedoes carried a 643-pound warhead, traveled at 45 knots, and had a maximum range of 6,000 yards. Everything about the engagement favored Kumano. Evans gave the order anyway. At 07:15, Johnston broke formation and charged toward the Japanese fleet at 38 knots. Lieutenant Robert Hagen, the gunnery officer, recalled later that the crew felt like David without a slingshot. Johnston zigged and zagged between the geysers of water thrown up by Japanese shells, laying a smokescreen over a 2,500-yard front to conceal the escort carriers from enemy gunners. Nagato fired a full salvo from her 16.1-inch guns. The shells landed short. Haruna fired her 14-inch secondary battery. The shells fell to starboard. Yamato engaged with her 6.1-inch secondary guns. 19 shells fell around Johnston without hitting her. Kumano and her sister, ship Suzuya, opened fire at 18,000 yards. Johnston closed to 17,000 yards, then 16,000 yards. At 07:16, Hagen opened fire with all 5 5-inch guns. The first salvo straddled Kumano. The second salvo hit her superstructure. The third salvo hit her forward fire control director. Over the next 5 minutes, Johnston fired more than 200 rounds of 5-inch ammunition at a target that outweighed her by 5 to 1. At least 45 shells struck Kumano, setting her superstructure on fire and destroying multiple gun mounts. Japanese return fire remained inaccurate. At 18,000 yards, Kumano's gunners had difficulty tracking the small fast destroyer weaving through their salvos. Evans closed to 10,000 yards. At 07:26, he ordered the torpedo officer to fire all 10 torpedoes. The Mark 15 torpedoes entered the water at 40-second intervals, forming a spread pattern calculated to compensate for target maneuvering. The torpedoes ran true at 45 knots, their wakes clearly visible in the calm morning sea. Kumano's lookout spotted the torpedo tracks. Her captain ordered a turn to starboard to comb the torpedoes. The maneuver worked for 7 torpedoes. They passed harmlessly down Kumano's port side. 3 torpedoes continued toward their target. At 07:27, 1 torpedo struck Kumano's bow. The explosion was catastrophic. The 825-pound warhead detonated against Kumano's hull, plating forward of the number 1 turret below the waterline. The blast tore a hole 40 feet wide in the cruiser's bow. The force of the explosion, combined with Kumano's forward momentum at 30 knots, caused structural failure along the entire forward section. The bow, from the stem to the number 1 turret, a section weighing approximately 300 tons, separated from the rest of the ship. It remained attached briefly by twisted metal and severed cables before the sea tore it completely away. Kumano lost buoyancy immediately. Her bow submerged. Water flooded the forward compartments. She lost steering control. Her speed dropped to 12 knots. She began a slow turn to port out of formation. Suzuya, steaming directly behind Kumano, faced an immediate decision: continue the attack or escort the crippled flagship. Her captain chose an escort. Suzuya broke formation, reducing speed to match Kumano's crippled pace. Within 90 seconds, Johnston's torpedo attack had removed 2 heavy cruisers from Kurita's formation, reducing his firepower by 20%. The American destroyers had achieved what the escort carriers could not. They had disrupted the Japanese attack, but Johnston's torpedo attack carried a price. At 0730, Yamato's fire control director finally solved the problem of tracking the fast-moving destroyer. Yamato's main battery, 9 18.1-inch guns arranged in 3 turrets, trained toward Johnston at a range of 20,300 yards. The turrets fired 1 salvo. 3 shells, each weighing 3,200 pounds, fell toward Johnston, traveling at 2,600 feet per second. At that velocity, the shells arrived 4 seconds after leaving Yamato's guns. Johnston's lookouts saw the muzzle flash. They had no time to warn Evans. 3 shells hit Johnston simultaneously. The first shell struck aft, below the waterline, penetrating the hull near the port propeller shaft. It passed through the engine room without detonating, creating a hole 6 feet in diameter, but the shock wave from its passage through the water crushed piping, severed electrical cables, and fractured steam lines. The engine room flooded immediately. Johnston lost her port engine. Her speed dropped from 38 knots to 17 knots. The second shell struck the after deck house, destroying gun mounts 3, 4, and 5. 27 men died instantly. The third shell struck the bridge area, destroying the torpedo director and causing multiple casualties. Shrapnel severed the fingers on Evans's left hand. He wrapped the injury in a handkerchief and continued commanding. Seconds later, 3 6.1-inch shells from Yamato's secondary battery struck Johnston. 1 shell hit aft, destroying an anti-aircraft director. 2 shells hit the bridge, killing or wounding everyone except Evans and 1 other officer. Johnston's forward momentum carried her into a rain squall. Evans used the momentary concealment to assess damage. The initial report was catastrophic: port engine destroyed, steering control lost. 3 of 5 main battery guns destroyed. Fire control director was destroyed. Radar systems damaged. Communication systems partially destroyed. 45 men dead or dying. Johnston was crippled, having survived just 15 minutes of combat against the most powerful battleship ever built. The crew worked with desperate efficiency. Damage control parties rigged emergency steering. Engineers restored partial power to the starboard engine. Electricians spliced severed cables to restore rudimentary communications between the bridge and the remaining gun mounts. Gun crews manually aimed the 2 surviving 5-inch guns using local control. Within 6 minutes, Johnston was capable of limited maneuvering and could still fight. Evans ordered her back into action. At 0742, Rear Admiral Sprague ordered the destroyers to make another torpedo attack. Johnston had no torpedoes remaining. She had 2 functional guns out of 5. She had 1 engine instead of 2. She had no fire control director. By every measure of naval doctrine, Johnston should have withdrawn to protect herself. Evans brought Johnston around and charged back toward the Japanese fleet. Over the next 2 hours, Johnston would fight a running battle that defied every principle of naval warfare. She would engage heavy cruisers at point-blank range. She would duel with battleships using manually aimed guns. She would deliberately draw fire from ships that outweighed her by factors of 10 to 1. She would save the escort carrier Gambier Bay from destruction by interposing herself between the carrier and a Japanese heavy cruiser. She would break up an entire Japanese destroyer squadron's torpedo attack by charging directly at them and forcing them to fire their torpedoes prematurely. Every action Johnston took after 0730 violated established doctrine, and every action was tactically correct. The mathematics of destruction had changed. Johnston could not sink battleships. She could not penetrate their armor. She could not outrun their guns, but she could force them to maneuver. She could make their gunnery solutions obsolete by constant movement. She could absorb shells that would otherwise hit the carriers. Johnston became a sacrificial piece in a desperate defensive game, trading her survival for minutes of time that allowed the escort carriers to launch aircraft and extend the range. The Japanese were confused. Kurita's battle plan assumed he faced American fleet carriers with heavy cruiser escorts. The aggressive destroyer attacks suggested fleet destroyers operating as part of a carrier task force. The constant air attacks suggested fleet carriers with full air wings. The smoke screens and ferocious resistance suggested American confidence. Kurita believed he faced a force equal or superior to his own. He ordered his ships to maneuver defensively, to avoid torpedo attacks, and to maintain formation integrity. These orders slowed his advance and reduced his firepower. At 0800, Johnston engaged a Japanese heavy cruiser that was firing on Gambier Bay. Evans gave an order that summarized the entire action. "Commence firing on that cruiser. Draw her fire on us and away from Gambier Bay." Johnston scored multiple hits with her remaining guns. The cruiser shifted fire to Johnston. Gambier Bay gained precious minutes to maneuver. At 0820, Johnston spotted a squadron of 7 Japanese destroyers preparing to launch torpedoes at the escort carriers. A destroyer squadron torpedo attack at close range would sink every carrier in Taffy 3. Evans ordered Johnston to attack the destroyer squadron. 1 American destroyer attacked 7 Japanese destroyers. Johnston opened fire at 7,000 yards, her 2 remaining guns firing as fast as the crews could load them. The Japanese destroyers, surprised by the aggressive attack, concentrated their fire on Johnston. They hit her repeatedly, but the confusion and smoke caused them to fire their torpedoes at excessive range. Every torpedo missed. Johnston's crew fought with a clarity born from understanding their situation completely. They could not win. They could not escape. They could buy time. Time was the only currency that mattered. Each minute Johnston remained afloat was another minute for the escort carriers to run, another minute for aircraft to launch, another minute for the thin screen of destroyers to inflict damage on the Japanese fleet. The crew understood this implicitly. They fought beyond the point where retreat made sense. They fought beyond the point where survival seemed possible. They fought because their deaths might save thousands of others. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. By 0900, Johnston had taken dozens of hits from cruiser and destroyer fire. Her remaining engine was destroyed. She lost all power. She could not steer. She could not shoot. She was dead in the water, surrounded by Japanese ships. At 0945, Evans gave the order to abandon ship. At 0950, Japanese destroyers closed to point-blank range and continued firing. At 10:05, Johnston rolled to port and sank bow first. She had fought for 2.5 hours against overwhelming odds. 141 men survived from a crew of 327. Commander Ernest Evans was seen abandoning ship but was never found. He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. The citation stated he had launched a determined and sustained attack on units of the Japanese Central Force, the last ship seen to sink, and the most valiant destroyer in the Pacific. The damage Johnston and her sister destroyers inflicted on Kurita's fleet was more comprehensive than anyone realized during the battle. Kumano, crippled by Johnston's torpedo at 0727, limped toward Manila for repairs. She never reached Japan. On November 6th, American submarines ambushed her convoy. 2 torpedoes struck Kumano. She made it to Dassault Bay on the Luzon coast but could not be repaired. On November 25th, American aircraft found her and sank her. From the moment Johnston's torpedo destroyed her bow on October 25th to her final destruction on November 25th, Kumano never rejoined the Japanese fleet. She was effectively removed from the war by a single torpedo from a destroyer that outweighed her by a factor of 5. Suzuya, which broke formation to escort the crippled Kumano, suffered catastrophic damage from air attacks later that morning. At 11:05, 5 torpedo bombers from escort carrier Kitkun Bay attacked her. She suffered multiple near misses that ruptured fuel tanks and started fires. The fires reached her torpedo storage. At 13:10, Suzuya's torpedoes detonated, destroying the cruiser from within. Her crew abandoned the ship. Destroyer Okinami rescued survivors. Suzuya sank at 13:22. Like Kumano, she was removed from combat by Johnston's initial attack, which disrupted Kurita's formation and exposed both cruisers to concentrated airstrikes. Chikuma fought through the morning, engaging destroyers Heermann and Samuel B. Roberts with her 8-inch guns. She scored multiple hits on both American ships, but the constant harassment prevented her from firing effectively on the escort carriers. At 08:54, a torpedo from an aircraft belonging to Admiral Felix Stump's Taffy II struck Chikuma amidships. Her engine rooms flooded, her speed dropped to 18 knots, then to 9 knots. She lost steering control. At 11:05, 5 more torpedo bombers from Kitkun Bay attacked. 2 torpedoes struck Chikuma's port side. At 1400 hours, 3 additional torpedo bombers, led by Lieutenant Joseph Cady, delivered the final blow. More torpedoes struck her. Chikuma began to sink. Destroyer Nowaki arrived to rescue survivors and either scuttled the cruiser or watched her sink from accumulated damage. The historical record remains unclear on this point. What is clear is that Chikuma sank on October 25th, another victim of the chaos Johnston's initial attack created. 3 heavy cruisers, Kumano, Suzuya, and Chikuma, were sunk or crippled directly because Johnston and her sister destroyers disrupted Kurita's formation during the critical first 15 minutes of the battle. The Japanese never regained cohesion. Their tight formation, designed to concentrate firepower and provide mutual defense, fractured. Individual ships maneuvered independently to avoid torpedoes. They lost visual contact with each other in the smoke screens laid by the American destroyers. They fired at targets they could barely identify through the smoke and rain squalls. The aggressive American attacks convinced Kurita he faced fleet destroyers supported by fleet carriers, not escort destroyers protecting escort carriers. Kurita's confusion was understandable. Fleet doctrine stated that escort carriers operated far behind the battle line, protected by battleships and cruisers. They did not operate independently where enemy battleships could engage them. The ferocious resistance from Taffy III's destroyers suggested fleet units. The constant air attacks suggested fleet carriers with full air wings. The smoke screens, the torpedo attacks, the aggressive gunnery all indicated a force prepared to fight. Kurita believed he faced elements of Halsey's Third Fleet. He believed American battleships and fleet carriers were approaching. His radio communications were disrupted. He could not contact his scattered cruisers. His flagship, Yamato, had maneuvered north to avoid torpedoes, taking him away from the action. He lost tactical control of his force. At 9:11, shortly after Gambier Bay sank, Kurita ordered a general retreat. His battleships had not been seriously damaged. His remaining cruisers were operational. He still possessed overwhelming firepower, but he had lost confidence. The ferocious American resistance, the constant air attacks, the loss of 3 heavy cruisers, and his own confusion about what forces he faced convinced him he was walking into a trap. He ordered his ships to break off the engagement and steam north towards San Bernardino Strait. The order stunned his officers. They were winning. The American carriers were running. One had sunk, others were damaged. Japanese shells were finding their targets. Victory seemed minutes away. But Kurita insisted. The fleet turned away. The decision saved Taffy 3. At 9:25, as Johnston was sinking and the surviving American ships prepared for annihilation, Japanese shells stopped falling. Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague, commanding Taffy 3, could not believe what he was seeing. The Japanese fleet was withdrawing. His signalman confirmed it. The battleships were turning away. The cruisers were disengaging. The destroyers were forming up for retirement. Sprague's small force had survived impossible odds. His 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers, and 4 destroyer escorts had fought the most powerful battleship fleet ever assembled and forced it to retreat. The cost was terrible. Gambier Bay sank at 9:07. Howell sank at 8:55. Johnston sank at 10:05. Samuel B. Roberts sank at 10:00. More than 1,000 American sailors died, but they saved the invasion fleet at Leyte Gulf. They saved tens of thousands of American soldiers who would have been slaughtered if Kurita's battleships had reached the landing beaches. The strategic consequences extended far beyond Leyte Gulf. The Battle off Samar, combined with American victories in the Sibuyan Sea, Surigao Strait, and Cape Engano, destroyed the Imperial Japanese Navy as an offensive force. Japan started the war with 6 fleet carriers. All 6 were sunk by October 1944. Japan started the war with 12 battleships. 3 were sunk at Leyte Gulf. The survivors never conducted another offensive operation. Japan started the war with 38 heavy cruisers. 13 were sunk at Leyte Gulf or immediately afterward. The Japanese Navy became a fleet in being, ships that existed but could not project power. They remained in port, conserving fuel, waiting for the final battle that never came. The human cost of Johnston's action deserves examination. 186 men died aboard Johnston. They died by drowning when the ship sank. They died from wounds received during the battle. They died in the water over the next 2 days because rescue operations were delayed by poor coordination, additional kamikaze attacks, and inaccurate position reports. The survivors floated in the Philippine Sea for 48 hours before rescue ships arrived. Many died from exposure, dehydration, and shark attacks during those 2 days. The delay in rescue operations remains one of the more shameful aspects of the Battle off Samar. The men who saved the invasion fleet were abandoned for 2 days while the Navy focused on other priorities. The Japanese casualties were also substantial. Kumano lost approximately 600 men when she finally sank on November 25th. Suzuya lost more than 400 when her torpedoes detonated. Chikuma lost her entire crew except 1 man. When destroyer Nowaki rescued Chikuma's survivors and attempted to transit San Bernardino Strait on October 26th, she encountered American cruisers, Vincennes, Miami, and Biloxi. The American ships opened fire with 6-inch guns. Destroyer Owen finished Nowaki with torpedoes. Nowaki sank with all hands, including nearly all of Chikuma's surviving crew. One Chikuma sailor, who was not rescued by Nowaki, drifted ashore and was captured. He was the sole survivor from a crew of nearly 900 men. The human cost on both sides was staggering. The question remains whether Johnston's attack was reckless or calculated. The title suggests recklessness. The evidence suggests calculation. Evans understood the tactical situation completely. Taffy 3 could not outrun Kurita's battleships. The escort carriers had no armor. Their aircraft carried anti-submarine weapons, not armor-piercing bombs. Within 30 minutes, Japanese battleships would close to effective range and systematically destroy every carrier. The only option was disruption. Johnston could not sink battleships. She could not penetrate their armor, but she could force them to maneuver. She could make their gunnery solutions obsolete. She could absorb shells that would otherwise hit carriers. Johnston's attack was a calculated sacrifice based on perfect understanding of the tactical mathematics. Evans was part Cherokee. He faced discrimination throughout his Naval Academy years and his early career. Some officers questioned whether someone of Native American heritage belonged at Annapolis. Evans proved them wrong through performance. He graduated in the top third of his class. He excelled at gunnery and navigation. He commanded destroyers during the peacetime Navy when competition for command was intense. By October 1944, he had demonstrated exceptional competence for 13 years. His decision to attack at Samar was not the impulsive act of a reckless commander. It was the considered judgment of an experienced officer who understood exactly what needed to be done and exactly what it would cost. The other destroyer commanders reached the same conclusion independently. Commander Amos Hathaway aboard Harriman attacked without orders. Lieutenant Commander Robert Copeland aboard Samuel B. Roberts, a destroyer. Escort not designed for surface combat, attacked without hesitation. These were not reckless men. They were professional naval officers who understood their duty. The mission was clear: protect the carriers. The method was clear: disrupt the Japanese attack. The cost was clear: they would probably die. They attacked anyway because the alternative, allowing Japanese battleships to slaughter the invasion fleet, was unacceptable. Modern analysis of the Battle of Samar focuses on the tactical decisions, the weapon systems, the formations and maneuvers. This analysis obscures human reality. Men in steel ships made choices based on incomplete information under extreme stress. Evans made his decision in seconds. He had no time for staff consultations, no time for lengthy tactical analysis. He saw Japanese battleships closing on American carriers. He attacked. Every other destroyer commander made the same decision at the same time. This was not a coincidence. This was the result of years of training, of established doctrine that emphasized aggressive action, of leadership that prepared men to act decisively in crisis. The American sailors who fought at Samar understood they were part of something larger than themselves. They were protecting the invasion fleet. They were protecting the soldiers landing on Leyte. They were protecting American strategy in the Pacific. Their deaths would save thousands of other Americans. This knowledge sustained them through the battle. It gave meaning to their sacrifice. The men who survived never forgot the men who died. They never forgot the choices made that morning. They never forgot that they had faced impossible odds and survived through courage, skill, and the willingness of others to die so they could live. The Japanese sailors also fought with courage and professionalism. They followed orders. They executed their mission. They engaged targets they believed were fleet carriers and fleet destroyers. When ordered to retreat, many questioned the decision but obeyed. Naval discipline held. The Japanese Navy's culture emphasized obedience and sacrifice. Individual officers did not question their admiral's decisions, even when those decisions seemed wrong. This cultural characteristic, which served Japan well in earlier battles, became a liability at Samar. Kurita's confusion and subsequent retreat wasted the tactical advantage his fleet had gained. But his subordinates could not challenge his decision. They could only execute it. The Battle of Samar demonstrated the limits of material superiority. Kurita possessed overwhelming firepower. His battleships could destroy every American ship in Taffy 3 within 30 minutes if allowed to fire without interruption. But he was never allowed uninterrupted fire. The American destroyers forced constant maneuvering. The American aircraft forced constant evasion. The smoke screens obscured targets. The confusion disrupted communications. Material superiority meant nothing without tactical control. The Americans, outnumbered and outgunned, maintained tactical initiative through aggressive action. They forced Kurita to react instead of act. They created uncertainty where he expected certainty. They won through determination and courage when they should have lost through simple mathematics. The legacy of Johnston and Taffy 3 extends beyond military history. The battle became a symbol of American resilience, of the ability to prevail against overwhelming odds through courage and sacrifice. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz stated that Taffy 3's success was nothing short of divine intervention. Historians have studied the battle for 8 decades, analyzing every decision, every maneuver, every factor that contributed to the American victory. The consensus is clear. Taffy 3 won because its sailors refused to accept defeat. They fought when retreat seemed rational. They attacked when defense seemed prudent. They sacrificed themselves for others. Johnston's wreck lies in approximately 21,000 feet of water in the Philippine Sea, discovered in 2021 by explorers using deep-sea submersibles. The wreck is remarkably intact. The hull rests upright. The forward guns point toward where the Japanese fleet would have been. Even in death, Johnston faces the enemy. The site is a war grave protected by international law. No salvage is permitted. The men who died aboard Johnston remain with their ship, eternal guardians of the waters where they made their stand. The story of Johnston's attack at Samar forces uncomfortable questions about military doctrine and human cost. Was the sacrifice necessary? Could Taffy 3 have survived through evasion alone? Would Kurita have reached the landing beaches if the destroyers had not attacked? These questions have no definitive answers. What is certain is that Evans and his crew believed their sacrifice was necessary. They acted on that belief. They paid the ultimate price. Their action, whether judged reckless or calculated, achieved its objective. The invasion fleet survived. American forces liberated the Philippines. The Japanese Navy never recovered. The 15 minutes from 07:10, when Johnston began her attack, to 07:27, when her torpedo struck Kumano, changed the course of the battle and possibly the course of the war. Those 15 minutes demonstrated that courage and determination could overcome material superiority. They demonstrated that individual actions could have strategic consequences. They demonstrated that ordinary men, when circumstances demanded it, could perform extraordinary acts. Johnston did not sink 3 cruisers in 15 minutes with torpedoes alone, but she crippled one, forced another out of the battle, and contributed to the destruction of a third through the chaos her attack created. She bought time. She created confusion. She demonstrated American resolve. She saved thousands of lives at the cost of 186 of her crew. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.